Welcome to Equipped for Impact, the podcast designed to assist Christian parents, leaders, and educators to train up the next generation to stand firm in their faith and influence the world for Christ. We're your hosts. I'm Nate.
And I'm Lewis.
And we are glad you're here with us today, where we're actually joined with a special guest, Brian Baker. Brian, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hey, excited to be with you guys.
So Brian is currently and I'm going to butcher your title, Brian, but it's like executive director, head honcho, I don't know, something like that, of Word of Life Bible Institute. It's a 2-year Bible program, college-level Bible program for students and all about discipleship. But some more about Brian. Brian's been involved in ministry with young people, with students and teenagers and college students for a really long time. I don't know, how many years is it, Brian? Do you know?
Close to 30. Yeah,
close to 30.
Wow.
Yeah.
There we go. So lots of experience, but I think most importantly, Brian is also a dad to 3. And did I see correctly, you are now a first-time grandparent?
Yeah, I have been elevated. Yes, I am now a grandparent.
So elevated to grandparent status, which to our listeners, that's great for us because Lewis and I can speak as parents and pastors and teachers, but you've been through all the stages and now on to, like you said, elevated to the next stage. So that's exciting. How old is the grandkid?
Yeah, my grandson is 3.5 months, so we are having a blast.
Excellent. Well, that's great. So, Brian, thank you so much for joining us. I just appreciate all the wisdom that you bring to the ministry, being able to see that firsthand myself. And as we were talking, you brought up, this idea of just kind of as we work with our kids and disciple our own children or our students or, kids in youth group, church, whatever, you brought up this idea of like behavior modification versus, that true heart transformation. And so, I think as parents, we're often tempted to feel like we're winning when our kids are just like, they're well-behaved, they're respectful, they're compliant, all of that. But why would you say in your experience that outward behavior is such a deceptive metric for spiritual health?
Yeah, that's a great question. And first of all, let's acknowledge that we do all want our kids to behave well, right? I think
yes.
We don't want them throwing tantrums in public and all of those things that we have all experienced as parents at some point. So It's not that behavior doesn't matter, but the problem is I think we typically have it backward as parents and even as educators as we look. And I now work for years in youth ministry, which was more children and teenagers. And now I work in the higher education world of mainly freshmen and sophomore and college age students. And we can fall into this in this age group as well, and in the past have, for sure. But I think we have it backward. The behavior is not the issue. The behavior is not the problem, but actually the behavior isn't the victory either. It's not the ultimate thing that we're looking for. And so our kids or any person's behavior is just a symptom of what's going on the inside, right? And so, so if your focus as a parent is on the behavior, if your kids want to comply, they will eventually learn to perform in such a way that makes you or others happy. And then you'll have the rebellious kids that don't care about the performance, and they'll just continue to push back, and it will get worse. And so we don't want a performance-driven life for our kids or for ourselves. We want a genuine life, a life that's lived for the glory of God. And so, I think for any listeners, parents, anybody who's listening to this, anybody that's in the sales world, think about it this way. So as a salesperson, this is a very oversimplification of sales, but
we like oversimplifications.
Okay, good. You have lead measures and lag measures. Okay.
Yeah.
And your lead measures, are the things that you do to get the result that you want, and the lag measures are the result. And the result's what you want. The end product is, if you're a salesman, you want to sell more product, right? Okay.
Yeah.
But you also know as a salesman, if I want to sell more product, that there are certain things that I have to do along the way. Relationships I have to build, phone calls I have to make, visits I have to make, research I have to do in order to get to the end goal that I want. And so when I think about our kids, the behavior side of them is maybe what we want. We desire to see the change in their life. But what we need to know and remember is that that doesn't happen without all of these things that happen behind the scenes or on the inside that lead to that change.
Mm.
And you can manipulate that, and you can tape or staple fake fruit on a tree and make it
Yeah.
look like it's fruitful, but eventually all of that's exposed, right? And that's the reality. And Proverbs 4:23 says, "Keep your heart with all vigilance, for from it flow the springs of life," right? So eventually what's on the inside's gonna come out. And so the danger of behavior modification is that you never address the heart.
Gotcha.
And if the heart's never addressed, the long-term ramifications of that will not be good.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think sometimes it's quicker, to in the moment, your child is misbehaving or, student and youth group in the classroom, whatever, and you want to address the behavior right away. So like how can you in moments like that slow down and make sure you're addressing both the behavior and that heart that,
Yeah.
like you said, is that lead measure kind of behind driving that behavior?
Yeah, in the moment is where the rubber meets the road, right? If you're in a
Yeah.
grocery store and your toddler is throwing a fit or wants you to buy them something that you're
Yeah.
not going to buy them, and so there's the temptation to not want to be embarrassed because of those around you, and so you give in to that pressure, or you want to show yourself as dominant in front of other people, and so you scold that child publicly, or you even discipline that child publicly, and neither are good. I just, for me, it's in that moment you have to remember what you want. That
Mm.
that's where you need to go. Going way back, one of my mentors, and you know him well, Nate, is Mike Calhoun. And
Mm.
Mike
Yep.
used to say this about discipline. And now I'm not talking discipline like disciplining your children. I'm talking discipline like spiritual discipline or
Yep.
physical,
Okay.
discipline
Yep.
in that way. Discipline is remembering what you want. And so,
Yeah, really good.
that's ultimately what it is. So in the moment when I could choose to, if for me it is, a weight loss goal or a health goal, well, in the moment when I'm standing at the refrigerator, I have to remember what I want, right? I
Yep.
want to be healthy, and therefore I'm going to choose this over this. And the same is true when you're in the moment with your children, is you have to remember what you want. Do you want instant ease, or do you want to just make this situation go away and make yourself feel better and them feel better in the moment? Then you can do that. But once again, the long-term ramifications are going to be difficult. And so when you're in that moment, I just encourage you, you kind of have to take a step back. So if it's in a public setting, you have to remove yourself and your child from that setting. Could that mean leaving a shopping cart of groceries and you go and find a restroom to have a private conversation with your child? It might. Like, I don't know.
Mm.
Um, but in the home, in the moment, it's not yelling. It's not demanding a certain action from them. And so what I encourage parents to do, and I didn't always do this well. See, it's a lot easier when you get older and look back and realize all the things you did wrong and the growing process you go through. But I encourage, when there's a discipline moment, you send that child to their room, and then you gather yourself. You pray. If your spouse is there, you guys talk about it. And then under control, you walk into that situation and you begin to address the root issue,
Mm.
not just the behavior, which is the fruit, but the root. What's really going on? Several years ago, when I used to do a podcast, a youth ministry podcast, I had Dr.
Yep.
Ted Tripp on the podcast, who wrote Shepherding a Child's Heart,
Yep.
which is an amazing book. And in that interview, I was talking to him about how do you have conversations in small groups with teenagers, and he gave me a question to ask that I also have applied to parenting. that is when we're talking to our kids. Once they get to a certain age and they can understand, ask the question, help me understand.
Mm.
And, so going into, first of all, you have to address what happened, right? This is what happened. This is what you did. Or if you're not fully sure, you're asking questions. What happened,
Hmm.
And then instead of making accusations, you ask questions. And when you ask questions, like, help me understand, what you're doing is you're saying to your kid that I care more about what's going on the inside than just what your outward actions were. So help me
Yeah.
understand why you reacted when your brother took that toy from you. I'm
Yeah.
talking smaller children here, and you then took another toy and clubbed him upside the head with it. Help me understand why you did that and what you were thinking.
Yeah.
And then, and the reason, you've probably heard this quote many times, but accusation hardens the heart, but a question pricks the conscience.
Hmm.
And so you're not just saying you did this, you were wrong, you need to go say you're sorry to your brother or sister. And that is many times how we address it. And is saying you're sorry, right? Yes, absolutely. But we didn't ever get to the heart of the issue. And so, when you think about getting in that moment, asking good questions, you're not just asking what they did. Oh, you need to know that. Even why they did it. You want to know what is going on in the heart and led them to a place of making this decision. Now, you were asking about in the moment, and
Yeah.
so I kind of took it further than in the moment. But
No, that's
you
good.
know,
Hey, and you mentioned, apologies, and this is something that we, especially in a school context where Lewis and I, do most of our ministry is a school context, but you mentioned apologies, and yes, you
mhm,
should apologize and all of that, but especially with older children and teenagers, you know, you don't want to force that
correct.
because it's disingenuous, right? Because a true apology is going to come from the heart. So how do you
Correct.
balance that,
Yeah.
whether it's with your kids or other people, of like trying to point out that they should apologize and practicing that, while at the same time not forcing something that is, in the end, if they're just doing it and it's disingenuous, it's just behavior modification.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I honestly, I do not like when I see a parent force their child to apologize when they're not ready to apologize because there's nothing
Mm.
genuine about it. Tell them you're sorry. Tell them you're sorry. Okay, well
Yeah.
what did that accomplish? It accomplished that just saying the words is all I need to do. I don't really need to address what really happened here. And
Mm.
this is true, all the way up through the age group that I'm working with now.
Hmm.
And when we deal with this. And so before an apology can ever happen, there has to be a helpful recognition. You have to help that young person recognize what's wrong, what they did that was wrong, how their response was wrong. They need to be able to acknowledge that, because if they can't acknowledge that, they can't genuinely apologize or even ask forgiveness. Which, by the way, just a side note, like, there's a difference between those two things too.
Mm.
You can, I could walk by and accidentally knock a cup of coffee off of your desk, totally accident, and I would apologize to you because I did that. But I don't necessarily need to ask your forgiveness for that. I did not intentionally offend you.
Mm.
But, but when somebody has done something wrong to another person and there's an intention there, then there does need to be eventually an apology, but you can't rush to that. You have to help them process through. Do you understand why what you did was wrong? What was going on? Help me understand what was going on in your heart and in your mind. What were you thinking? And help them work through biblically what that looks like. And then, ultimately we help them learn, like, Matthew 18 and what it looks like to confront a brother, and Matthew is at 5, where it's, more if someone has, there's offended you and if you've offended, right? And so we're
Yep.
dealing with it from both sides. And I would not encourage an apology before they're actually ready for it to be genuine. So,
Brian, just as a follow-up to that question, one of the things that we see a lot in our realm in education, and I'm sure parents see it too, is oftentimes a child will show remorse or be apologetic, but
mhm.
it's more because they got caught, right? And
Yeah.
so what's the difference between a child who is sorry that they got caught and a child who is sorry for their sin, or in a true recognition of, wow, that was a sin. I lied, or I was prideful, or I was angry. And then how can we as parents help our kids see the difference, especially maybe even look at it from different age groups, right? Because the way that conversation is going to happen with an 8-year-old is probably different than the way it's happening with an 18-year-old.
Yeah, Lewis, that's a great question. I mean, first of all, obviously, as a parent, we want the latter. We want a child who's or a teenager, whoever, that's sorry for what they've done genuinely, and not just sorry because they got caught. Obviously,
Mm,
that's our desire. And part of working through this process is how we respond to them in those moments.
mm,
And so a lot of the way that they're going to view moving forward from when they have done something wrong uh, is how those that lead them respond when they did something wrong. And so the question we have to ask is, what is our desire for them? What do we truly, this teenager, this child, they have clearly done something they shouldn't have done. They didn't come and confess it. They got caught doing it. And now I don't necessarily see the remorse that I'd like to see for the sin. I just see somebody who doesn't like the consequences, right? Okay, that's
yeah.
kind of the scenario we're talking about here. And so we have to be able to express our desire for what we want to see in their life. And they aren't always going to receive that, but we have to express that our desire is not that they never do a specific action ever again. Because I think that's, you ever said to someone, well, I'll forgive you if you promise to never do it again.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, well,
Who can make that promise?
I can't make that promise because I know I'm going to do it again. I'm an idiot.
Yeah.
What I make bad choices sometimes. So,
But we
and
want our
so, but
8-year-old to make the promise.
exactly, that's exactly right.
Yeah.
And so, but what we've done with that is we put it back to behavior, right? Like if you,
Mhm.
and so what I encourage is that in your conversation, it's less about what they did and it's more about the sinfulness in our heart, the rebellion that is against God, that God knows us, yet still chooses to love us and still chooses to forgive us,
Mm.
and that we have a loving God. Now there are consequences for our sin. And you are going to face some consequences because of your sin. But I want you to know those consequences are there because I want you to have the kind of relationship with the Lord that understands this forgiveness and moving forward. And so boy, it's hard because we deal with that even at a collegiate level. There are sometimes that students have to face discipline for things that they did, and sometimes they come and confess it, and then sometimes they don't. And even many times when I'm sitting down, which if it gets to my office, it's usually a fairly elevated situation. But
Yeah.
there are times where we sit down with a student and say, and I will say these very words: "This is going to go a lot better for you if you're just honest about
Mm.
what's going on."
Yep.
And and I'll say this: we want to help you. We want to be able to restore you. There are some violations that could lead to you being dismissed from school. Yes, that's possible, but
Mm.
ultimately that's not our desire. It's for restoration. And so in having that conversation, I'm trying to soften what my response is going to be, even though there might be consequences. And so a child is going to be more likely to hide their sin if when they do sin, their parents blow up on them.
Yep.
Yeah.
They're going to be more likely to hide those things and be fearful. If my children are more fearful of how I'm going to respond than they are desiring to come to me because they think that I might be able to help them, then I'm not in a good place. Now, that doesn't happen when they're young. Okay. That happens as you build a relationship over time. And I've had, conversations with all of none of my kids are teenagers anymore. My youngest are 20. And so, but as they were in their teenage years,
Yep.
I believe we were able to establish a relationship where they knew they could come to me or to my wife about things, and we were not going to lose our minds on them, but we genuinely wanted to help them. And you've probably heard this, a scenario of this, and thankfully as a parent, this never happened to me. But, I told my kids, if you're ever in a situation, even if you put yourself in that situation by poor choices that you need help, then you call me and I will come get you. I don't care what's happening. I will come get you. Will there maybe be consequences later for the situation you put yourself in? Yes. But that doesn't change the fact of my love for you, and I will come get you, and I will drive you home. And in that moment, we won't even have that conversation. We'll probably have it the next day, but we probably now I never had to experience that as a parent, but my kids knew. Like my kids knew that was because what do I want? I want the best for them. And so Lewis, that's a great question. It's not an easy answer, but I think the best thing that we think about is our response. What is our response to them? And that will dictate the future of how they talk to you and come to you with things.
Yeah. That's actually a really good segue into my next question is, as parents, we can't lead our kids someplace that we've not gone before.
Yeah.
And so as you talked about the heart of the parent and where we are, so how do we work on our own heart before working with our child's heart?
Yeah. No, this is this is so true. So I've been in leadership for quite a few years, and in the last 4 or 5 years I've led more people, leading more people than I ever thought I would. And there's just one thing I've learned in that time, and this is not even about being a parent. This is about being a leader, and then it translates into parenting as well.
Yep.
And that is that the hardest person I am ever going to lead is me. I'll ask people sometimes. I've actually taught seminars on this subject on kind of, sounds a little weird, but like self-leadership, on leading yourself. And I'll ask the question in a group setting, like, who's the hardest person you've ever had to lead? And sometimes people will describe someone with a certain personality or, and eventually we just get around to realizing that the hardest person I'm ever going to lead is me. But the reality is, if I can't lead myself, then I really can't expect my kids to follow any kind of example that I'm gonna set for them. Doesn't mean perfection, because we do not we're not going to experience that in this life. But it is important when we do that we identify that we need to lead ourselves well. And so I think one of the core basics of that is humility. And with humility is a recognition that I need help. I can't do this on my own. And ultimately that help comes from the Lord, right? And I also need other people around me to help me, to hold me accountable. And so, if I'm expecting or asking my kids to do something that I'm not willing to do myself, the old saying, do as I say, not as I do, doesn't work.
Yeah.
No.
And that's kind of a saying, I think, from when I was a kid, that was like, okay, they're an adult. I listen to what they say. It doesn't matter what they're doing.
Yeah.
And as a child, you should listen, and respect your parents, but we need to set the example. And sometimes our kids end up setting an example for us that we have to jump on board and follow. But you can't do it if you're not living it yourself. So we talk about things like time in God's Word at our house, and So if I'm not spending time in God's word, what, how could I ever expect my kids to do that in their
Yeah, and,
study
and
of the
kind of
word?
kind of going back to your, the whole lead measures versus lag measures, right? We've spent a lot of time talking about the in the moment,
Mhm.
apologies and all of that. And I think this opens up that section of, you know, how do we as parents, before there's a conflict, before our kids inevitably need some correction and redirection, how do we lay that groundwork for
Yeah.
them? I mean, you mentioned, devotions, quiet time, whatever. What other things, can help lay that groundwork for that relationship so that inevitably when the moment comes, you've got that foundation to work from?
Yeah. I mean, some of the things I'll say won't be very popular, but I'll say some of them anyways. For us, like church was never optional.
Mm,
Youth group wasn't optional. Uh, and listen, I'm not trying to judge anyone that's out there that's the kind of world, the household that they're living in right now. I wasn't mean about it. We weren't belligerent about it, but there were definitely times that my teenage kids were like, "Yeah, I don't I just don't feel like going tonight." And I was like, "Okay, well, we're going anyways." You know.
mm,
And so there are just certain things. I think there's extreme value in personal devotions and family devotions, but I'm just going to be transparent. I really struggled to be consistent with family devotions as a parent.
mm,
And I would love to tell you that, man, we knocked it out of the park and we did it 5 days, nights a week. But we struggled with consistency with that. But can I
hmm
just tell you, your kids don't really remember the inconsistent that you got on a couple of week streak where you didn't do it at all. They remember doing it. They remember the establishment of that. And so it's the time in God's word, both individually and as a family, where you're setting standards that your children just know.
mm,
I joke, and this kind of goes to more perform or to behavior, but my kids played basketball, and I remember my son saying one time he was playing a game, and one of the one of the other players on the other team was really showboating, right? Just really showing it
hmm
up, and
Yeah, yeah.
he said, I know if I ever did that, I think my dad would walk out on the court and drag me off the court, by my ear. I never told him that, right? I never told him, but there was just kind of an unwritten standard in our house that we don't. That's not the way we function. We don't live like that.
Mm,
We don't operate like that. We don't elevate ourselves like that. Being in leadership at Word of Life, one of the things that I always told my kids is if you ever use my position to your advantage, that's not going to be a good thing for you if
mm.
that gets back to me. If the words, "Do you know who my dad is?" come out of your mouth, that's not going to be a good thing for you.
I wonder if that comes out of my girl's mouth.
Yeah, see?
You need to I've always wondered that,
You
Yeah.
should ask.
Yeah, so I'm gonna have to ask them. Like at church and at school, like, do
Yeah.
they ever say like, "Do you know who my dad is?"
Trust me, it does, it occasionally can happen. But like, it's a way that we operate as a family. Like
Yeah.
one of the things that I feel the strongest about personally and as a family is humility. I
Mm,
don't ever want us to be in a place where we're elevating ourselves, and therefore it just is an unwritten standard that my kids know, and I think fairly decently have lived out, and certainly with faults and struggles, but it just goes back to the heart issue versus the behavior issue. And our desire, we made a shift here at Word of Life about 15 years ago, very intentionally. And in an evaluation, I think we saw in the way we were ministering to students that maybe we were a little more behavior modification focused than we were
mhm.
heart transformation focused. And
Yep.
we just decided that there were just certain things that really didn't matter. Okay.
Mm,
That didn't, I mean, And I could name some of the dumb rules we used to have, but I'm not going to do it. Nate, you know some of them. So,
That's right.
and it's just like, really?
I'm just
Why
glad
would,
I get to
what?
have a beard now because
Yes,
15 years
exactly.
ago
Like,
I could
there you
not.
go. Just so many things. And so, the same is true in our home. And so there are not a lot of hills that you probably are going to want to die on as a parent, but
Mm,
there are some and there are a few. And I would hope those hills would be focused on the heart
mm,
and not on. I'll tell you one last story, and then I know we're probably running up close on time. And if you guys have any other questions, but for years, Nate, you know this, I operated as an area missionary for Word of Life. And every week I was in different churches and ministering in churches. And sometimes my family would be with me. And when we would arrive at a church that I was either speaking at or whatever it was, I would, I would give my kids the rundown, right? It would be like, all right, we're getting ready to go in there. You behave, no running in the church. I would give them and then if they didn't, on the drive home, it was giving them the smackdown for what they didn't do. What you didn't behave, and I'll just remember. I actually don't even remember who I was listening to or what they were talking about, but I was driving in my car. I was actually in Winston-Salem, North Carolina,
Yep.
and I was listening to this radio program, and the Lord just overwhelmingly convicted me that I cared more about what other people thought of my kids
Mm,
than I thought of my kids' hearts.
That's good. That's
mhm,
really good.
And I went home. I get emotional when I talk about this. I went home that night and I set my kids down and I apologized to them. And
mm,
I said, I've been operating this way and I probably will fall into it again, but it's not the way I want to operate. I care more about who you are as a person on the inside than I care about what some random deacon at Joe Schmo Baptist Church says about you.
mm,
And I'm going to do my best as a dad to care more for your heart than I do for my reputation as a dad. And it was a life transforming moment for me. I'll never
mm,
forget it. I mean, that was 15 years ago or close to it, maybe 13 years, whatever it was. And it radically impacted the way I think about things moving forward. And so I that's kind of a story that always sticks with me when I think about, boy, I want my kids' hearts, to be molded and transformed. And, Romans 12 talks about the renewing of our mind and like just all of that. I want that. And as a parent, I want to nurture that. I want to help that. And does it mean occasionally they do something in public that I maybe wish they wouldn't have done? Yeah, maybe. But am I going to choose to just rip into them in that moment, or am I later going to have a quiet conversation with them about it? Because if I rip into him in the moment, then everybody around me is like, oh, okay, like he's the boss, like he's got everything under
mm.
control. But if I'm
It's more about
handling
you
that
than it is about
quietly
them.
later, it's
Yeah.
not about my reputation.
Mm.
It's not about my reputation. It's about my kids' hearts. And so just something that I've been really passionate about with them.
No, that's awesome. That's a great, kind of reminder for all of us here as we're kind of coming down to the end of this. But I just wanted to end, maybe give you an opportunity to say, how do you like give encouragement to that parent who maybe they're where you were, what you said,
Mhm.
15 years ago, driving in your car, and they just feel like they're failing. Either they're not seeing immediate results, or they've listened to this and they've said, you know what, that's me. My kids toe the line, but they, are just really sneaky about their sin instead
Mhm.
of really actually being transformed. What encouragement would you give to the parent in that situation?
Yeah. First of all, I'd say, that's tough. It is. When you watch your kids be in a place where their heart's not in the right place,
Mm,
and you watch them rebel, and you feel hopeless at times. And the only thing sometimes you can do is pray. Ultimately, our kids ultimately make their own decisions, right? And I know the principle is true, but train up a child in the way that he should go, and when he is older, he will not depart from it. We have to remember that's wisdom literature, which means it's a principle. It doesn't mean it happens 100% of the time.
mm,
And so, and you can probably find things that you did wrong. Okay, you can do that because I can. Definitely. I look back in my parenting and even still parenting adults today, I still do things wrong at times. But you can look back on that, or you can just move forward and you can decide to set a new pattern and a new path forward. And I'll just tell you, I made a commitment, and I felt like, and even still today, that I've mostly stuck to it. And that is that when it was necessary, I was going to tell my kids I was sorry.
Mm.
And I was going to ask them to forgive me. And I was going to just be upfront with them. I wasn't going to try and hide it and just say, well, I'm the dad, whatever, I can do what I want. I just made that commitment. And sometimes, that sets a pattern that your kids learn to follow. And so I've many times over the years had to apologize to my kids for my reaction or overreaction or underreaction or whatever it was. But I would say, just keep praying. Let your kids know you're praying for them. And depending on their stage of life and their age of life, you have to balance out how overbearing you are or are not. And the older they get, the less you can be. And the more you have to just trust the Lord, and you still put the parameters in place if they're still in your home, and you still have the rules they should follow. And yes, you have all of that, but you can't force it. You can't make them love the Lord. But man, if you pray for them and you let them know that you're praying for them, and you speak the truth in love to them, and you are honest about your own struggles and your own failures and shortcomings, because so many times we see ourselves in our kids, right? Oh man,
Yeah.
when my kids are amazing, I just see my wife, and when they're doing dumb things, I just see me. Like that's just the reality of it. I wish that wasn't true, but it is.
So true. Oh,
well played.
Yeah. There's good. Yeah, we'll shout out to Lynn on that one.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Oh man. Well, thank you so much, Brian. This was so encouraging and it was helpful, encouraging to us guys. Coming along behind you a little further, back in the process than you are. But thank you so much for making the time to talk with us and share. And I feel like there's so much we didn't get a chance to get into. Maybe we'll have to have you back on at some point to keep going into this.
Yeah, you learned how long-winded I am. That's what you learned.
Nah, it's all right. It was great stuff. And if anybody listened to this, we mentioned the Bible Institute, and if your kids are older and they're thinking about college and all of that, definitely check out wordoflife.edu. We'll link to it in the show notes. A great place to study the Word of God, get ministry experience, and ultimately have other people pouring into your kids so that they can have that heart transformation. Any other places that you might want to plug right now here at the end before we close this out?
No, that's great. I mean, Word of Life, we're here to serve the church. Word of Life is, and I would just say, if you have a high school or almost college age student that wants to build a biblical foundation to live the rest of their life on, that we would love to see them on one of our campuses here in New York or in Florida, just to help them grow. That's what we're doing. We're trying to just give them the word, help them grow, and send them out to be world changers. So
that's awesome. Well, thanks so much, Brian. And thank you all for listening today to Equipped for Impact. If this episode encouraged you, please share it with another parent who could use this resource and is going through this same struggle that we all do of how to make sure we're speaking to our child's heart. And be sure to subscribe so you don't miss our next episode. But until then, keep leading the next generation to stand firm in their faith and influence the world for Christ.